Emperor Haile Selassie is often regarded as being more important to Ethiopia's modern history than anyone else in Africa. He served as Ethiopia's regent from 1916 to 1930 before ascending to the throne on November 2nd and reigned for over 45 years. The feudal system of government prevented Ethiopia from keeping up with the economic and technological advancements occurring elsewhere, and the country's lack of advancement eventually led to its overthrow. Even though Ethiopia was able to avoid colonization and remained a political leader and symbol of African independence throughout his reign, Emperor Haile Selassie exemplified one-man rule more than the majority of other autocrats, ultimately to his own disadvantage and the detriment of his country's advancement. In the end, his effort to modernize the country's education system also contributed to the downfall as foreign-educated students returned to Ethiopia seeking reform. Calls for change by students, the military, and other members of the ruling family, combined with the emperor's decreasing mental awareness, led to his abdication in 1974. Haile Selassie can be considered the world's last emperor who held true political power. Hello guys, and welcome to Memory Lane. Please be sure to subscribe and click the notification icon to get notified about future uploads. In this video, we'll be looking at yet again another episode of one of Africa's greatest leaders of all time, Haile Selassie. You could also do well to check our previous video on Haile Selassie, the God Emperor of Ethiopia. Haile Selassie, originally named Teferi Makowen, was born on July 23, 1892, near Hara, Ethiopia, and died on August 27, 1975. He was Emperor of Ethiopia from 1930 to 1974, seeking to modernize his country and steering it into the mainstream of post-World War II African politics. He brought Ethiopia into the League of Nations and the United Nations and made Addis Ababa the major center for the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union. Teferi was a great-grandson of Haile Selassie of Shewa and the son of Ras Makowen, a chief advisor of Emperor Menelik II. Educated at home by French missionaries, Teferi at an early age favorably impressed the emperor with his intellectual abilities and was promoted accordingly. He pursued progressive policies when serving as the governor of Sidamo and later Hari province. He aimed to weaken local nobility's feudal hold on power by strengthening the central administration, for instance, by creating a civil service with salaries. As a result, he came to stand for politically liberal segments of society. He wed Waziri Menen, Menelik II's great-granddaughter, in 1911. When Menelik II passed away in 1913, his grandson Lej Iyasu ascended to the throne, but the majority of Ethiopians who were Christians found him to be unreliable and closely associated with Islam. Teferi became the center point of the Christian uprising, and in 1916, he toppled Lej Iyasu. Zweditu, Menelik II's daughter, thereupon became empress in 1917, and Rastafari was named regent and heir apparent to the throne. Rastafari, a progressive figure who became the focal point of the goals of the younger modernist generation, contrasted with Zweditu's conservative viewpoints. He achieved a notable victory in 1923 when Ethiopia was admitted to the League of Nations. The next year, he made the first ever trip outside of Ethiopia, traveling to Jerusalem, Rome, Paris, and London. Following the death of Zweditu 2 years later, on November 2, 1930, he was crowned emperor and given the name Haile Selassie, meaning Might of the Trinity. He had already accepted the title of Negus, meaning king. He pushed a new constitution in 1931 and severely curtailed the authority of parliament. From the late 1920s onward, Haile Selassie, in effect, was the Ethiopian government by establishing provincial schools, strengthening the police force, and progressively outlawing feudal taxation. He sought to both help his people and increase the authority of the central government. Haile Selassie led the struggle against the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, but he was driven into exile in May 1936. On June 30, 1936, he addressed the League of Nations in Geneva and made an emotional plea for assistance. When World War II broke out, he was able to form an army of exiled Ethiopians in the Sudan with the help of the British, invading Ethiopia in January 1941. British and Ethiopian forces took Addis Ababa back a few months later. Despite being restored to his position as emperor, Haile Selassie had to regain the power he had previously held. He once more carried out social, economic, and educational reforms in an effort to slowly and gradually modernize Ethiopian government and society. The Ethiopian government continued to be largely the expression of Haile Selassie's personal authority. In 1955, he granted a new constitution, giving him as much much power as the previous one. Overt opposition to his rule surfaced in December 1960 when a dissident wing of the army secured control of Addis Ababa and was dislodged only after a sharp engagement with loyalist elements. The creation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963 was greatly aided by Haile Selassie. He ruled Ethiopia until 1974, when growing unemployment and his government's political gridlock led to insurrection among some of the army. They overthrew Haile Selassie and installed the Marxist-Lenin Derg as a military dictatorship in place of a constitutional one. Haile Selassie lived the rest of his life in his own castle while under house arrest. Official sources at the time claimed his death was due to natural causes, but later evidence showed that he had likely strangled on the military government's order. As the messiah of all black people, Haile Selassie was revered by the Rastafarian movement. Due to Haile Selassie's internationalist ideas, Ethiopia was admitted as a founding member of the UN. He oversaw the Organization of African Unity creation in 1963 and served as its first chairman. The organization was the forerunner of the African Union. He was toppled in a military coup in 1974 by the Derg, a Marxist-Lenin junta. On August 27, 1975, Haile Selassie was assassinated. Some historians have criticized him for quelling uprising among the landed nobility, who continuously rejected his reforms. Others had criticized Ethiopia for not modernizing quickly enough. The Harari people suffered under his leadership and many left the Harare region. Human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch have criticized his government for being undemocratic and tyrannical. There was never a formal law or government policy that criminalized any language, despite some sources claim that late in his rule, the Oromo language was outlawed from education, public speaking, and use in administration. Numerous Amaras was moved to southern Ethiopia by the Haile Selassie government, where they worked in the judicial government and churches. Other Hachalu Ndase passed away in June 2020. Oromo demonstrators demolished the statues of Haile Selassie in London's Kaninazuro Park, and his father's equestrian monument was taken down in Harar. The internal politics of Haile Selassie's nation were a major source of opposition. While Haile Selassie attempted to modernize the nation and elevate it to a position of worldwide influence following Italy's occupation from 1936 to 1941, the subsequent government faced opposition from the general public, particularly among peasants and those with higher education. Between 1960 and the revolution of 1974, there was several coup attempts to topple the Haile Selassie administration. The overtaxing system in Gojam since 1930, the famines in Wollo and Tigray in 1958, and the autocratic land seizure are some of the most infamous acts that damaged Haile Selassie's reputation. At Addis Ababa University, the first student movement for the elimination of feudalism and land redistribution in Ethiopia Empire took place in 1965. The Eritrean War of Independence, which sought Eritrea's independence from the Ethiopian imperial government, is another aspect. After regaining the throne following Italy's conquest of Ethiopia from 1936 to 1941, Haile Selassie became well known around the world by actively supporting African decolonization during the Cold War. He made a substantial contribution to putting Ethiopia in a favorable strategic position in the Suez Canal, where it was pitted against the Soviet Union, the United States, and Yugoslavia's non-alignment governments. Additionally, Addis Ababa was selected to host the Organization of African Unity in 1963 and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa headquarters in 1958, which culminated in a momentous moment in the middle of the 1960s in Addis Ababa. On December 13, 1960, military coup occurred at Guinet-Liu Palace while Haile Selassie was returning from an official visit to Brazil. The deadly coup was coordinated in the capital city until the 1974 revolution. This coup is considered the initial point of the student movement. The situation in Ethiopia had worsened by the 1970s, with unemployment rising and the government unable to address the issues facing the nation. Haile Selassie's reign was threatened. He lost control of his army when many soldiers quit due to insufficient pay. He was overthrown from power in a coup as a result of this weakening of his defense. He endured house imprisonment right up to his passing in 1975. The reason for death remained in question. Some stories said he had passed away naturally, while others said he had likely been strangled to death on government orders. In 1992, his remains was located in the Trinity Cathedral in Addis Ababa. He was given a respectable funeral in November 2000.